It has been called the garbage heap of Tamriel, to where everything rotten and despoiled eventually flows. Its borderlands and coasts have been ravaged by civilization after civilization, but its heart is inviolate, for so poisonous is its air, ground and water, that its mysteries remain secure. Empress Hestra of the Elysian Empire attempted to civilize the pirate-infested bogs of the southeast, but she soon abandoned the prospect. The Riemann dynasty of the Second Empire also tried. You'll hear claims that they successfully united all of Tamriel with the exception of Morrowind, but in truth, Black Marsh proved too wild to control. Thousands of Imperial troops gave their lives in the vain hope of taming the land of the Argonians. Even the great conqueror Tiber Septim could not win Black Marsh with the blade. Instead, a peaceful approach was required. The Pocket Guide to the Empire might refer to the region as the garbage heap of Tamriel, but history does not lie, and Black Marsh proved to be quite the prize for several emperors, an unattainable prize as well. The Argonians were experts in denying emperors their desires, something very few could do while keeping their heads on their shoulders. Much like their homeland, the Argonians are described in an undesirable fashion. Practically all imperial records on the race will describe them with words like repulsive, primitive, heathen and beastly. With the exception of the Orsimer, no other race can expect to be looked down upon quite as often as the Argonians. Yet here I am with a list of powerful, influential Argonians, who've each made their mark on Tamriel. Are the lizard folk truly subhuman, sub-elven savages, or are they actually disdained because they are not well understood, and because they appear so alien when compared to the other mortal races? Well, I'm not here to discuss the biology of the Argonians and their relation to the other races. I'm here to tell you about the greatest Argonians ever to set foot on Tamriel. These individuals weren't held back by precarious race relations. Some achieved infamy in the shadows, some rose the ranks of foreign systems, while others proved themselves to be better conquerors than the decorated invaders of Black Marsh's past. Hey guys, it's Drew here, and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. In today's video, we're going to be counting down the greatest Argonians to leave the fetid swamps of Black Marsh and make a name for themselves in Tamriel. And by the end of the video, we'll determine who was the greatest Argonian of all time. So let's get right into it, starting with a few honourable mentions. Our first great Argonian is famous all over Tamriel. She won the hearts of countless souls across the continent, and there is no mortal in existence who can wield a spear and knead a loaf with as much skill. She is a legend. Some say she is fictitious, but many more choose to believe in her. She is Lifts Her Tail, the lusty Argonian maid. Whether she exists or not doesn't really matter, because Lifts Her Tail is a cultural icon. She represents the humble, hard-working citizens of Tamriel, and she has brought comfort and warmth to many cold bedchambers. What more is there to say? She thoroughly deserves a spot on this list. The next great Argonian has also crept into many dark bedchambers in the dead of night, but her motives aren't quite so pleasant. She wields a dagger instead of a broom, and she is a master assassin. Her name is Achiever, and she was the unofficial leader of the Shadinhal Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary during the Oblivion Crisis. Achiever was a Shadow Scale. Shadow Scales were once an order of assassins hailing from Black Marsh. Membership was ingrained in Argonian culture, as any lizard born under the sign of the Shadow were taken at birth and given to the Dark Brotherhood for training. As a result of their early initiation, Argonian assassins tend to be among the most skilled in stealth and murder. Achiever was one such Shadow Scale, and she served her young life in the royal court of Argonia before being transferred to the Shadinhal Sanctuary. Achiever rose through the ranks and became an executioner in the guild. Lucien Lachance was the head of the sanctuary, however he was often away on business, and Achiever was entrusted with taking command in his stead. Achiever was killed during the purification of the Shadinhal Sanctuary. Another Shadow Scale worthy of mention in this list served in the Falkreath Sanctuary of Skyrim during the 201st year of the Fourth Era. His name was Vizara, and he served the King of Black Marsh before committing his adulthood to the Dark Brotherhood. Vizara was unique in that it is believed he was the last member of the Shadow Scales. The Shadow Scales are all but forgotten, an ancient tradition from another time. And he says, "Today I am the last of my kind. My order is extinct. Now I happily serve Astrid and this sanctuary. I am a trained killer, and once again have been given purpose. Life is good." So when the Penitus Oculatus ravaged the Falkreath Sanctuary, killing Visara in the process, it is believed that the last living Shadowscale had died. We have one final honourable mention, and this Argonian was a mighty warrior, though her fame was forged in the light of day, not in the shadows like Orchiva and Visara. This Argonian was named Seize All Colours, and she was the guildmaster of the Fighters Guild in the 582nd year of the Second Era. But her rise to prominence was not entirely free from treachery. When the Plane Meld began and Molag Bal unleashed his dark anchors on Tamriel, Seize All Colours believed that the Fighters Guild had an especial responsibility in fighting off the Daedra hordes of Cold Harbour. The current guildmaster, Yofnir Iceblade, was unwilling to get involved. Seize All Colours took action and murdered Yofnir so that she could take control of the guild. She had once been a worshipper of Meridia, and this no doubt played a part in her decision, as the Daedra Lord despises Molag Bal and all things undead. It is said that the hero known as the Vestige discovered her betrayal, but what action he or she took is a mystery. While these Argonians are great in their own right, we are now onto our top 4. The following Argonians, be they good or evil or somewhere in the grey, have immortalised themselves in the histories for their deeds. One was a thorn in the side of a great empire, another was at the forefront of a Tamriel-turning insurrection, and the last two were involved in snuffing out an Akaviri invasion. Taking the 4th spot on this list is a seafaring lizard named Red Brahmin, and to call him an interesting character would be an immense understatement. Red Brahmin is a name surrounded by tall tales. They say he was the greatest pirate of the First Era. They say he was a man, but in truth he was an Argonian. They say he acquired his name due to his full head of luscious red hair, which he possessed despite being a lizard. But rumours aside, there is no denying that Red Brahmin was an expert navigator, as skilled in traversing the narrow waterways of Tamriel's most inhospitable province, as he was in stealing. Pirates have proved themselves to be nuisances over the centuries, but few have drawn the attention of the most powerful mortals on the continent like Brahmin. Red Brahmin and his crew were so proficient when raiding the shores of the Niben that Empress Hestra of the Elysian Empire herself took an interest in seeing him stopped. Whenever the Empire sent its ships in pursuit, Red Brahmin would simply slip away into the swamplands of Blackmarsh, disappearing without recourse, but with a hold full of plundered booty. Those Imperial sailors would always remember those as the days that they almost caught Captain Red Brahmin. With his growing wealth, Red Brahmin established a pirate kingdom in the depths of Argonia, near present-day Black Rose. Empress Hestra had had enough. When reports made it to the Imperial city, notifying her that Red Brahmin had eluded justice again and again, she cursed him, exclaiming in frustrated admiration, "That's got to be the best pirate she's ever seen." In First Era 1033, Hestra demanded Red Brahmin's head, and after many unsuccessful attempts, the Imperial ships finally managed to track down Brahmin's brigand kingdom. In the raid of Red Brahmin, the infamous pirate finally lost his head. But stories of his mischief would endure for all time. An unforeseen side effect of this pursuit was that the Imperial fleet's expedition resulted in the Empire's first reliable accounts of Argonian culture. So in a way, Red Brahmin helped the rest of Tamriel learn about the Argonians. Red Brahmin may be the most famous Argonian, but taking the bronze, we have an individual whose name wouldn't be known outside of Blackmarsh and Morrowind. This character is a slightly controversial choice, as there is practically zero information on them beyond a name. I can't even guarantee a gender, so you must be wondering why I gave them second place. Well, this Argonian was the Archwarden of the An-Xileel political party, and therefore I think it's fair to associate the achievements of this faction with him. This Argonian was named Khlil. The only information that exists about Khlil comes from the Infernal City novel. Perhaps if we had their full story, and if I could confirm his involvement in the An-Xileel's actions in the early 4th Era, I would have placed Khlil in first place, but I figured third place was fitting without those confirmations. When the Oblivion crisis began, the histories of Blackmarsh called all of the Argonians back to the swamps. The seemingly omniscient trees were aware of the calamity before it ever began, and as a result, gave the Argonians precious time to prepare for the invasion. At the time, the An-Xileel party of Argonia was known predominantly for their anti-imperial sentiment and their staunchly isolationist, nationalist beliefs. According to the Imperial perspective, the An-Xileel were entirely nativistic in their views, interested only in purging the former colonial influences, and returning Blackmarsh to whatever state they imagined it had been in before it was ruled by foreign powers. They were ruthless in their treatment of non-Argonian prisoners of war, and in this time of great strife, no rival factions could match their martial discipline and organisation. So with the Hist overlords providing them intel, the An-Xileel led the lizard folk against Mehrunes Dagon's hordes. They were clinical in dealing with the invaders, and even chased the Daedric beasts back into their gates, slaughtering them in the Deadlands. Blackmarsh's northern neighbours were not so fortunate. They suffered immensely from the crisis, and to make matters worse, the floating celestial rock named Bar Dao fell upon Vivec City, leading to a slew of natural disasters, including the eruption of Red Mountain. The An-Xileel, basking in their triumph over the forces of Oblivion, saw this as an opportunity to strike back at their historic oppressors. And so, in the year 6 of the Fourth Era, the Accession War began, and the Argonians invaded Morrowind. Thousands of Dunmer were slain, thousands of beastfolk slaves were freed, and much of southern Morrowind was captured by the Argonians. Their campaign was finally brought to a halt by House Redoran and their Dunmeri army. Huge cities like Mournhold and Tyr were sacked, and the Dunmer were forced to move their capital to Blacklight. The aftermath of the Accession War can be seen in Skyrim with the overwhelming number of refugees crossing the Velothi Mountains, but much of the fallout remains to be seen. Of course, this is the story of Khlil, not the An-Xileel. I want to emphasise that it's speculation on my part to give Khlil credit for the achievements of the An-Xileel, but it does make sense. Khlil is the Archwarden of the faction in the year 40, and it is likely that 34 years prior, he would have been making a name for himself, rising the ranks of the party. He might have already been the Archwarden at that time, or possibly he hadn't joined at all, but I think the achievements of the An-Xileel in the late 3rd, early 4th era are arguably the greatest performed by any Argonians, so it would have been a shame to leave them off the list simply because we don't have the names of the individual members. Taking the silver medal is an Argonian named Keshu the Black Fin, and she was a legendary warrior during the Free Banners War of the Second Era. Her exploits became famous across Blackmarsh after 2 writers, named Peak Areel and Mi Si, documented them in a series of books. Keshu the Black Fin is best known for serving as the Ebonheart Pact's military general in Skyrim, a rank she rose to after turning the tide of battle against the Akaviri invaders in Morrowind. She fought briefly in Cyrodiil during the Free Banners War, but her greatest victory was convincing Almalexia to outlaw slavery in Morrowind. From a young age, Keshu had an obsession with ancient Saxhleel ways, and wished to restore Blackmarsh to the once great Saxhleel civilization that existed long ago. The nickname Black Fin originated from a test in which Keshu was tasked with tracking down a lost centipede. Keshu's centipede had been cornered by a trio of hungry Nagas. Nagas, that's N-A-G-A, are a breed of Argonian that dwell deep in the inner reaches of Blackmarsh. They have huge mouths filled with dripping needle-like fangs, and can stand as high as 8 feet tall. Keshu stalked the trio, remaining concealed beneath the surface of the surrounding dark water. As the Naga hunters circled and closed in on their prey, Keshu silently rose from the dark water like a black fin on the prowl, a vicious dagger in each hand and a look of determination in her eyes. She dispatched the first 2 Nagas with quick slashes of her blades, advancing towards the third before her initial kills had barely sunk below the surface of the marsh. By the time the last Naga realised that death was fast approaching, it was too late to defend himself. He fell without providing even a token resistance to the single-minded Keshu. After completing her rites of maturity, Keshu decided to travel to An-Xileel. She visited Stormhold, where she befriended a Nord bard named Yoren, and battled an enclave of house-dressed slavers. After returning to Blackmarsh and visiting the ancient ruins of her Saxhleel ancestors, Keshu decided to assemble an army. Once she had sufficient numbers, she planned more battles with the slavers of southern Morrowind. Liberating her subjugated brothers and sisters became her calling. She won many victories, and her army grew in size with each success. Argonians came from far and wide to pledge themselves to her banner, and many of them were former slaves. But everything changed when Yoren sent word from Skyrim. Akaviri invaders had laid siege to the city of Windhelm, and were marching toward Mournhold. Almalexia's armies established a defensive line to protect Mournhold, while the Nords followed the invaders. Keshu's force, a phalanx of An-Xileel shellbacks and swamp warriors, hit the Akaviri from the south, providing the last element needed to end the invasion. Keshu was pivotal in securing victory over the Khlil snow demons of Akavir. Yoren would go on to become the leader of the Ebonheart Pact, and Keshu was instrumental in representing Argonian interests in the shaping of the pact. Even with the imposing gaze of Almalexia upon her, Keshu requested that her people should be set free. Morrowind was to take no more Argonian slaves, and Almalexia acquiesced. It took almost a full year for most of the Dark Elf provinces and holdings to comply with the orders of the tribunal, and even then there were Dark Elf houses that refused to accept the new accords. Keshu spent the following years serving as the Pact's military general in Skyrim, and took up arms in the Free Banners War. Keshu's military achievements were immense, and she saved countless slaves from captivity. Convincing Almalexia to outlaw slavery was also an impressive feat. But no one truly believed that this decree would last, and the slave trade never truly came to an end. But now we arrive at first place. It's hard to compete with Keshu the Black Fin, but this Argonian fought for many of the same causes. She's well documented in the history of the Second Era, during the tumultuous times of the Interregnum. Her name was Hatamim, and she served as the Argonian vice-canon of Stormhold during the Ebonheart Pact. She was kind enough to document her life story in her memoirs, titled From Argonian to An-Xileel. She writes, "Misunderstanding and oppression have poisoned Blackmarsh for centuries. My egg-siblings have endured subjugation by the Empire and slavery at the hands of the Dunmer. Armoured boots tread on our traditions and culture. We are fortunate to have the marsh. Without its perils to deter hapless dry skins, our ways might have already crumbled to dust. Despite our troubles, the Hist guides us still, and for the first time in memory, we have the chance to break the cycle." Hatamim grew up as a slave in service to Great House Dress. Her master was Glaphis Dress, a cruel Mer even by dress standards. Once, after seating the guests at a banquet out of order, she was beaten unconscious, and it was then that Hatamim decided she had had enough. She waited for the opportune moment, when she was working the salt rice fields, and the guards were sufficiently drunk. Then she overwhelmed them, and fled from the plantation with a handful of her fellow slaves. She crossed into the Fawnmarsh region of northern Argonia, before running into a troop of Argonians from the Arcane tribe. She believed them to be friendly, but in truth they were in the employ of House Dress. They captured Hatamim and the other slaves, and took them back to Fawn. On the journey, Hatamim received a vision from the Hist, telling her to defend the Nords and Dunmer in battle. She saw blood and horror, an Akaviri invasion, Nords and Dunmer falling like dead leaves. So when the slaves were returned to House Dress, the city was near empty, for Almalexia had called the Dunmer to arms. Hatamim confronted her former slave master Glaphis Dress, and strangled him with his own whip. She then challenged the centurion of the Arcane tribe to a duel. Hatamim killed her in single combat, and took command of the tribe. With her Argonian warriors in tow, Hatamim marched on Stonefalls to face the Akaviri invaders. Along the way, she joined up with Keshu the Black Fin's forces. They arrived at the battle near Ebonheart and helped to push the Khlil snow demons into the sea. Success was made possible thanks to the united efforts of the Dunmer, the Nords and the Argonians, and this battle facilitated the signing of the Ebonheart Pact. Hatamim was swiftly released from slavery and appointed as the Argonian vice-canon of Stormhold. She writes in her memoirs, "And now we are recognised. We have allies, not overlords. For the first time in memory, we are free under the law, and we are taking back our villages and strengthening our traditions." With the help of the Vestige, Hatamim stopped a ploy by the Old Mary Dominion to turn the races of the Ebonheart Pact against one another. This plot also extended to destroying the Argonians' connection to the Hist, resulting in the theoretical extinction of the race. But Hatamim and the Vestige thwarted the Dominion, and preserved the goodwill of the Ebonheart Pact. Both Keshu the Black Fin and Hatamim were vital to the improved Dunmer-Argonian relations of the Mid-Second Era. They both fought valiantly in many battles, and stood up for their enslaved kin. But Hatamim went from slave to saviour. She overcame a life of subjugation to unify her people with her former oppressors, and in doing so, she contributed significantly to the reclamation of Argonian land and the maintenance of their cherished traditions. And then, when her achievements were rewarded with rank and title, she served as an effective vice-canon, and rose up to the threat of the Old Mary Dominion. And that's why Hatamim was the greatest Argonian ever to walk Tamriel. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I've been Drew, this has been Fudge Muppet, and I'll see you in the next one.